What if Quentin Tarantino wrote and directed a Star Trek film? That's a what if I never thought I'd find myself asking, but in 2017, it was almost a very real possibility. So let's dive in and find out how this project came to be, what a Tarantino Star Trek would have been about, and ultimately why it never made it out of space dock. The early 2000s were rough for Star Trek fans. After Nemesis bombed at the box office and Enterprise was canceled, Star Trek went on hiatus for a number of years as we all wondered if and when it would return. Our prayers would be answered in 2009 when J.J. Abrams decided to reboot the original series on the big screen. And he did it in a very clever way in order to give himself the creative freedom to tell new adventures and not handicap himself with established continuity. Known as the Kelvin Timeline, in the opening to the 2009 film, a Romulan named Nero travels back in time and alters history, creating a new timeline diverging from the original Star Trek continuity. And while the 2009 reboot debuted with much fanfare and hope for the franchise's future, that hope was squandered with two disappointing sequels, starting with Into Darkness, which relied heavily on cheap fan service and also mishandled the casting and portrayal of an iconic villain.
It really bothered me that Benedict Cumberbatch, or whatever his name is, was playing Khan. Part of the reason that it bothered me, it was like, well, wait a minute, that just doesn't work. I mean, the thing that I liked about the first one is Chris Pine is playing William Shatner.
Like a steel trap, Mr. Chekhov. Full impulse, Mr. Sulu.
It sounds like you're doing Shatner.
It's coming out right a little bit. I gotta follow.
This one's gonna be full Shat. Watch out.
And Zachary Quinto is playing Leonard Nimoy. So thus, Benedict Cumberbatch can't be Khan, because Ricardo Montalban is Khan.
And that's because Benedict Cumberbatch didn't really resemble the Khan we all knew. Star Trek Beyond would follow, and while I felt it was a pretty good movie and filled with some great moments, it also somehow felt a little lightweight, which is ironic considering the Enterprise is destroyed in it. But like Kirk dying in Into Darkness, both moments carried little emotional impact compared to similar moments in the original film, since it felt like we hardly knew these characters yet, and these moments weren't really earned.
See, we are getting to know each other.
After Beyond underperformed at the box office, it would leave fans and Paramount wondering where to go from here. Enter writer and director Quentin Tarantino, known for his incredible dialogue and over-the-top violence.
I love that stuff.
Tarantino, a self-professed fan of the original series, credits this actor for his love of the franchise.
I'm definitely a fan of the original series, and I'm definitely, in particularly, a fan of William Shatner. I mean, that's my key into the series, is William Shatner.
And while Tarantino not only happens to be a massive fan of William Shatner, he's also a massive fan of his successor, too.
I am a huge Chris Pine fan. To me, of the actors of his age, he's hands down my favorite.
And that's one of the reasons why Quentin loved the 2009 film, because he felt Chris Pine, Zachary Quinto, Carl Urban, and the rest of the cast had captured the essence of the original actors, which is what makes those sequels feel like missed opportunities.
I didn't really care for the second one that much. It wasn't horrible. It just didn't ring any of the bells that the first one did.
When asked about directing a Star Trek film of his own, Tarantino said it would be worth having a meeting about. Well, he'd get that meeting as J.J. Abrams would convene a writer's room to hear his idea for a movie and discuss a way in. Soon after, Quentin would pick Mark Smith, writer of The Revenant, from that room to write his script.
I told Quentin, it's like I'm not a Star Trek guy. I'm not a big sci-fi guy. I know the characters and I like the relationships and all this, and I know about it. But he goes, don't worry about that. I'll take care of all the, the big sci-fi stuff and everything.
And Quentin would stay true to his word, as he wasn't about to let Smith have all the fun, as he'd also roll up his sleeves and write scenes too.
And he's reading a scene that he wrote, and it's like this awesome, cool gangster scene, and he's acting it out, and he's doing both then back and forth. And it's like, I told him, I said, man, I'm just so mad I didn't have my phone recording at that point. This would be so valuable. It was just amazing.
However, the news of Quentin helming a Star Trek film not only divided Trekkies, but Tarantino fans as well.
Action!
As Quentin has been adamant that he only plans on directing 10 films.
But I kind of like the idea of making 10 motion pictures and then, boom. That's it, that's done, the filmography is locked, and there you go.
And after Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, that would make his Star Trek film number 10, something many of his fans weren't happy about. Well, it turns out that's not entirely true. Since Star Trek wasn't one of Quentin's original ideas, he wasn't going to consider it part of his filmography and count it towards his 10th film, treating it instead more like a side project that he would indulge himself in.
When were you going to tell me that?
When it became relevant, as it just did.
And on the other side of that coin, many Star Trek fans were worried that this film was just going to be Pulp Fiction in space, something Simon Pegg was quick to squash, saying it wasn't going to be R-rated.
I don't think he's written an R-rated Star Trek script.
Quentin immediately refuted this, saying vehemently, if I do it, that's exactly what it'll be. It'll be Pulp Fiction in space, meaning this film will have all of the trademarks of a Tarantino film, but injected into the Star Trek universe. Speaking of the Star Trek universe, Quentin is on record saying how much he hates the Kelvin Timeline.
I don't like it. I don't appreciate it. Fuck that. All right? I don't like that.
Not only that, but he also has admitted that he has trouble wrapping his brain around it too.
My editor has tried to explain it to me, and I still don't get it. All right? Fred Raskin, about something happened in the first movie that now kind of wiped the slate clean.
Right.
I don't buy that.
And when he confronted J.J. Abrams about it, J.J. basically threw up his arms and gave him carte blanche to do whatever he wanted.
And I told J.J., I don't understand this. I don't like it. And then he's like, ignore it. Nobody likes it. I don't understand it. Just do whatever you want. If you want it to happen the exact way it happened on the series, it can.
Quentin has also gone on to say that the original series was episodic anyway, with each episode being able to stand on its own 2 feet, without a viewer having to have seen any others. And this would have been his approach to the movie too. He would have treated it like it didn't take place in the Kelvin universe, even though there'd be no indication whether it did or didn't. However, one very important detail that I wonder if he's forgetting is that the sets, like the bridge for example, look completely different in the Kelvin films than they do in the original series, although it's possible Quentin just doesn't care. It's worth noting, however, that Quentin's 2 favorite episodes and what he considers the 2 best episodes of Star Trek ever are The City on the Edge of Forever and Yesterday's Enterprise. And it just so happens that both episodes deal with alternate timelines and time travel, with each episode ending with their respective timelines resetting themselves. It's been revealed that Quentin's Star Trek script also contained a time travel element, and based on his fondness for these 2 storylines and very public dislike of the Kelvin Timeline, I wonder if at the end of his film we would see the universe reset itself back to the prime timeline.
Time has resumed its shape. All is as it was before.
And that brings us to the million-dollar question. What would Quentin's Star Trek film be about?
You could take some of the great classic Star Trek episodes and just easily expand them to 90 minutes or more.
Right.
And really do some really amazing stuff.
And that's exactly what Quentin planned to do. And the episode he planned to remake was the 17th episode of the 2nd season called A Piece of the Action, which sees the Enterprise ordered to Sigma Iosha 2, where the space vessel Horizon was reported missing 100 years earlier. Upon arriving at the planet, the Enterprise receives a message from an Ioshan named Bella Oxmix.
His title is Boss.
Boss? All right, Lieutenant, put him on.
Oxmix invites the crew down to the planet with promises of providing information on the Horizon. As Kirk, Spock, and McCoy head to the transporter room, Kirk notes that the Horizon arrived on this planet before the Prime Directive went into effect, leading McCoy and Spock to wonder how bad the contamination of the culture will be. Once they beam down to the surface, they quickly find out, as they discover a city and culture modeled after American gangster culture from the 1920s. And the source of the contamination is a book that Spock finds called Chicago Mobs of the 20s, which was left behind by the crew of the Horizon, and has come to form the basis for the Ioshan's entire society.
That's the book. I know it's a book. The book. They left it. The other ship, the Horizon.
This is the contamination, Captain.
As they meet with Oxmix, he demands Kirk supply him and his men with heaters, aka phasers.
You give me all the heaters I need. Enough tools so I can knock off all those punks all at once.
When Kirk refuses, Oxmix threatens to kill him. Later, Kirk meets with a rival gang leader by the name of Krakow, who makes the same request, except he offers to cut Kirk in on a piece of the action.
I'm sorry, Krakow. No deal.
That's too bad. Put him on ice.
It's at this point that Kirk and Spock decide to play along. Donning pinstripe suits of their own and wielding Tommy guns, they let both mob bosses know that the Federation is taking over the entire planet. But if both men help to maintain order and be willing agents of the Federation, they'll give them a piece of the action.
You got any objections?
Yeah. I hear a lot of talk, but all I see here is you and a couple of your boys.
I don't see no federation.
While the gangsters balk at this at first, they soon come around after Kirk demonstrates the awesome power of Starfleet's advanced technology. After returning to the Enterprise, Spock voices concerns about Kirk leaving criminals in charge of the planet. So Kirk proposes that the Federation's cut be used in a planetary treasury to guide the Iosians into a more ethical society. It's at this point that McCoy realizes he left his communicator down on the planet, prompting Spock to warn him that if the Iosians take it apart and learn how it works, it could be the key to the Iosians developing more advanced technology, eventually leading them to...
In a few years, the Iosians made a man a piece of our action.
As Quentin and Mark Smith began writing the script, they turned to old gangster films for inspiration.
So I mean, it's just, we're just kicked back, he and I, watching gangster films, laughing at the bad dialogue, and then, but talking about how it would kind of bleed into what we wanted to do.
However, one dark cloud that would hang over this project and any version of a fourth Star Trek film was the death of Anton Yelchin.
Ensign Chekhov, Pavel Andreevich, sir.
Leading many to wonder about the fate of Chekhov's character. And while J.J. Abrams has confirmed that the role would not be recast, Quentin took this one step further, whether he realized he was addressing it or not, when he said,
They might have trapped themselves a little bit by the simple fact that they have to use all the crew now.
Right.
In all the films, they've established it so much that you need Uhura, you need Scotty, you need Bones, you need all that stuff going on all the time. Everybody has to be represented in some big story where they all have to deal.
Quentin would go on to say that many of the original series episodes would often only focus on the three core characters of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, and he suggested that he would prefer to take this approach with his film as well. At the same time this was being written, another script by writing duo J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay, showrunners behind Rings of Power, was also being written. Their script would have brought back Chris Hemsworth as Kirk's father George, which was alluring to Paramount since Hemsworth had become a massive star following his feature film debut in Star Trek 2009. That put him on the map in an incredible opening scene that also helped him to land the part of Thor. Now I know what you're thinking, George Kirk dies in that opening scene. Well, what they would have done is basically copied the Next Generation episode Relics. In that episode, the crew of the Enterprise D discovers Scotty trapped for 75 years within a transporter buffer. For Star Trek IV, the approach would have been similar, with the film retconning the events of the first film to include George Kirk trying to beam himself over to his wife's shuttle where his son, Jim Kirk, had just been born. Except the transport fails, but before it does, it also absorbs his pattern into the buffer, accidentally creating a copy. This would have been somewhat similar to what happens to Will Riker in another TNG episode, Second Chances, with the transporter creating a copy of him several years earlier. Except the copy of George Kirk would live in the buffer, and after the Kelvin is destroyed, it would float in space for years with other scrap from the ship. The storyline would have revolved around Chris Pine and the crew of the Enterprise embarking on a mission to locate the wreckage of the Kelvin, which would find them eventually stumbling across his father's pattern. Then the adventure would take off from there, and it was going to be a father-son adventure like Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, but in space. There also would have been an original villain and a 2001 A Space Odyssey-esque sci-fi idea at its core. The prospect of a Star Trek film starring Chris Hemsworth was more alluring to the studio than one directed by Quentin Tarantino, so they made this script a priority. But following the financial underperformance of Beyond, they wanted to reduce the film's budget and actors' salaries, something both Pine and Hemsworth balked at. Not helping matters was the fact that Hemsworth was also underwhelmed by the script, leading him to turn down the project.
Whatever it is that you're offering, we're not into it. Don't care, couldn't care less.
Around this time, Tarantino came out to announce that he wouldn't be directing his Star Trek script, but encouraged Paramount to still make it, albeit with just a different director. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like Paramount is interested, as they've commissioned several other scripts since and seem to be adrift in space, unsure where to take the franchise next. Which is a shame, because given Tarantino's unique style and love of the franchise, his take on Star Trek would have likely been a bold departure from previous entries in the franchise. And as much as some fans were quick to criticize his involvement, saying Tarantino and Star Trek don't go together, remaking a gangster episode like A Piece of the Action was frankly the perfect vehicle for Tarantino to adapt for the big screen, considering his career started with a series of crime films. And if we look at those films, it's not hard to imagine what Quentin's Star Trek would have been like. Thanks for watching, everybody, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Bullets and Blockbusters for more great content.